محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We bear witness that there is no deity but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his servant and messenger. Dear brothers, we live this week on the yearly news of Hajj. Our brothers and sisters from all over the world are going to do the pilgrimage, and as a sign of the unity of the Muslim community. And spoke about community before. And Hajj is a manifestation of the greater community, where everyone can feel that they are belonging to a bigger group, and they feel that they have this long heritage and long connection with the rest of the larger community. And today I would like to talk mainly about problems or conflicts or obstacles that are facing our community. And I don't mean in this place, I mean generally, all over the world. As we speak about core values of Islam and what those values mean and what role do they play in our lives, we also have to speak about what obstacles that can arise that would inhibit us from adopting those values and inhibit us from living those values. But it all goes back to one element. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when He's describing human being, He says, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ. Did we not give him eyes? Did we not give him a tongue and lips? He gave him instruments. He gave us instruments so we can do things. And then He gave us a choice. He gave us the right path and He gave us the wrong path. Or He showed us the wrong path. And then, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this free will to choose, along with that, He gives us some guidance. He shows us what the right path is and He showed us what the wrong path is, and we have the right to choose. And we will be judged based on what we choose. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this context, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. And we have given him the two paths. فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ. But he did not take the steep road. He did not put enough effort into climbing the steep road. Al-Aqaba is the road that you have to walk through by putting some effort. It's not an effortless journey. It takes some effort. And in this context, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about this whole life is reduced to one word, kabad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in kabad, in hardship, in a situation or circumstance that we need to put some effort. And then he reduces the word for the life after, for the Jannah, to also one word, which is the true life, al-hayawan. وَمَا هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَهْوٌ وَلَعِبٌ وَإِنَّ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانُ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. For this life, he says kabad. For the afterlife, he says al-hayawan. But kabad means that we have to put some effort. And the effort that I would like to talk about is, or the obstacles that I would like to talk about, or al-aqaba, and a plural of which is aqabat, that I would like to talk about, is those that affect the solidarity of the community and the unity of the community. I spoke before about how Islam promotes solidarity and unity in a community. But along the same line as we speak about those core values, we have to speak about obstacles. You know, some people, some scholars like to talk about clearing up the, negative things before they talk about good things. And they call this tahliyah qabla takhliyah. It's just one way of talking about or approaching a topic. It's a nice way, but you could also talk about both at the same time. So as I talk about, inshallah, in coming khutbahs about those core values and what Islam means, I would like to talk about also some of those obstacles. So, Islam, من حيث المبنى, structurally, is divided into arkan al-Islam or arkan al-Iman. Some people even add al-Ihsan. And what arkan al-Islam means, the pillars of Islam and the pillars of Iman, or the pillars of faith and what they mean. This is Islam min hayth al-mabna, structurally. But Islam min hayth al-ma'na, what is the meaning of Islam, is what I'm trying to talk about, is those core values, the meaning of the actions, the meaning of the interaction within a community. But as people go through this life, they get born, they go and get some education, they grow up, they listen to many people, they listen to scholars, they listen to maybe intellectuals, they read books, they get a picture of the world around them. And it is part of that picture that I would like to talk about. And the current obstacle that I would like to talk about started approximately 100 to 150 years ago. When Islamic civilization was living a decline, and then the West rose. The Western civilization started rising, and it's continued to rise. This created what people call a cultural shock or cultural trauma, whatever you want to call it, but it created a form of distress, sort of like a double whammy situation. And as I speak, I'm mainly going to talk about the Arab world just because I'm familiar with it, but I would imagine there are similar processes that are happening in the rest of the Muslim community, maybe even the rest of the world, not just the Muslim world. This trauma is from the obvious circumstance that our civilization was declining and someone else's civilization is rising, and that creates humongous stress. And that stress is magnified many, many folds with the colonial era, when it was materialized into direct occupation. So people respond to stress in different ways. And as I explain how people respond to stress, you begin to see patterns, intellectual patterns that people follow that creates their ideas, imprints on their ideas and their solutions. But the same stress and those responses that make people walk different paths, how they react to this, is also fragmenting the Muslim world. And that fragmentation, after I describe those basic patterns, is what I'm trying to talk about, is the core of this talk. So, when I talk about this patterns, people may follow, these are standardized patterns of reaction. They are not necessarily there to describe a particular individual. But people take some percentage of this reaction and some percentage of that reaction, and they could be a hybrid of multiple types of reactions, but they are all knee-jerk reactions. and they are all subject to deviation, even if some of it is warranted and some of it is needed. But response number one is to run forward. Response number one is to run forward. You see your reality, you realize that it's painful, you realize that it's really not what you think it should be, not what you want, and you run forward. And the way you run forward is you run forward to imitate, to integrate with the same pattern that is causing you the stress, which is the Western civilization or modernism in general. In running forward, people make assumptions, and when they make those assumptions, they're doing it in good faith, and they're doing it for the purpose of fixing the problems that they see with their communities. And that basic assumption that they're making is that they're being rational. And under that banner of being rational, they justify everything else that follows. And we'll leave this category alone, and we'll talk about the rest of the categories, then we'll go into details and how these are imprinting our minds with a particular understanding and behavior that eventually is not very productive. Response number two is to run backwards. People feel that their identity is attacked. They feel that their values are being stolen from them. They feel they're being imposed something that is foreign to them. And they react. And they react by running backwards. Third kind of response is people just leave this reality into a fictitious reality. Of course, when I talk about those patterns, I'm talking about the extreme version of those patterns, and not necessarily to say that a particular individual or a particular group within the Muslim community is following this to the letter. But nonetheless, it's a pattern. Among those, this third response, which is just to sort of not acknowledge the existence of a problem. It's too painful to acknowledge. You just ignore it. From this particular knee-jerk reaction, you see the groups that are very, very, very far and exaggerating with the pathway of Sufism. A little bit is okay. A little bit may be needed. A little bit gives life beauty, give our faith beauty, give our actions beauty. A little bit is needed. A lot is deviation. And you see those on the ground. I mean, I'm not going to say any names in this khutbah of people or groups, but you see them on the ground. The fourth kind of response is the response that you want to change. You see your reality is very, very unsuccessful. Someone else's reality is very successful. You decide to change. While that seems like the right thing to do, and certainly is, but it is definitely subject to deviations. And some groups with their seek or their idea of change, they could follow the wrong path in changing and maybe even a violent path. And those groups also exist. So, where does that leave us? So I've spoken about how our Muslim world was about 150 years ago, and how this serious trauma, both psychologically and physically, came upon this Muslim world, and how people reacted. But those four types of reactions, those four patterns, they did not happen chronologically at the same time. And if you follow the path, time-wise, how these different mentalities or pathways were developed within the Muslim world, you would start to see where the problem really started. The Muslim world responded initially by and by the way, all of the readings for the last 100 years, or definitely for the last 50 years, all of the writings are about this particular problem in one way or the other. Everything you see people write about, the core problem is how you do Renaissance, how you react to Renaissance, how you spark a Renaissance, how you what's the right way to enter into modernism. Everyone agrees that there's a problem, but a lot of people disagree what the solution to that problem is. And this is what I'm talking about. Initially, what later became known as the era of Nahda, or Renaissance, there was not this much fragmentation. And people of all groups, those that are conservative and those that are the liberals, if you want to call them that, even though that is a borrowing of terminology from a different culture that does not really fit. And this borrowing from a different culture that doesn't fit is part of the problem. But if you want to sort of call them that. And those are the two main groups that are, in control of the masses on the ground within the larger Muslim world. So the conservatives and the liberals were actually in agreement. Everyone agreed in the beginning as the consciousness of the reality of the Muslim world was being understood, as the severity of the problem was just beginning to be understood. Everyone agreed that we need to do something about it. More so, everyone agreed that Islam has all the potential and all the characteristics of sparking civilization again, just like it did before. Everyone agreed that there is nothing in our history or our understanding or our faith or our heritage that is contradictory with that. And this is a very important point because the fragmentation came later. And as they agreed on this, a new group of people later became sort of the enlightened. And there's nothing wrong with this enlightenment. But as you follow what they did and how they understood the world and how they wanted to address the problem of sparking a civilization or renaissance, how much damage that happened. So basically, they started not identifying what is good to take from someone else and what is not good to take. They didn't make the distinction between what is valuable to us from somebody else and what is not valuable. Prophet ﷺ says, "احرص على ما ينفعك." Be watchful to what benefits you. And they were not watchful to what benefits them. And they started attacking themselves, attacking their culture, attacking their past, attacking their heritage. They started blaming, this problem is because, in the back 500 years ago, there's so-and-so, and this person wrote so-and-so, and that person said so-and-so. And you see that all over the media nowadays. They started whipping themselves, which is a common and well-described reaction of people who run forwards. They started under the banner of rationalism that came sort of like a slogan. They started blindly following under the banner of rationalism. They started blindly following those who are they imitating. And again, the problem is not in imitating. The problem is be watchful of what is beneficial to you. They did not understand the core problem of the Western civilization and the core problem of the Muslim civilization. And it is not the same problem. Because if you understand those core problems, you understand how that society came to be in this particular situation, and our society came to be in a different particular situation, and the solution that society found for their problem is not the same as the solution that for our problem. Western civilization was plagued by dual slavery to the political systems and also to the church. And by church, I don't mean Christianity, I mean the church. So there won't be any confusion about that. And how that society came to free itself from that dual enslavement changed their culture permanently. And yes, in the consequence, it damaged their faith severely. But that's not the core problem of the Muslim world. The core problem of the Muslim world is and has been for a very, very long time, dictatorship. It's a political problem. It's state against people. There's no church in Islam, and Islam does not even accept that concept. The concept of mediators, that Islam does not accept that concept. We have a direct relationship to Allah, each and every one of us. You need people for maybe for some information, for scientific or not scientific, but for like fiqh issues, yes. But you don't have any mediators. And of course, this is a serious problem for those, as I will speak later, for those other groups of people, the conservatives, so to speak. It's one of the pitfalls that they have to be very, very careful in falling into by making themselves mediators. So at the end of the day, the enlightened path of the Muslim world for the last 70 years have tried to say that the problem is us, the problem is our heritage, our knowledge, our understanding. Everything is old, everything is not good. This is the reason why we are so unsuccessful. And yes, some of them flat out attacked Islam, although most of them did not. But it's sort of all in the same current. In the end, what they tried to do is transplant a civilization, or the values of a civilization, or the cultural aspect of a civilization, from a place where it grew into our world, into our countries, and they were very unsuccessful because it did not grow within. So that's group number one. Now, group number two, if you want to call them the conservatives, after they were in agreement, and then they were subjected to such attack, they started reacting, but a knee-jerk reaction, not an intelligent reaction, in their path to affirming the identity, affirming the value of our civilization. They were very successful in protecting that. But that does not mean that they didn't go into some deviation as well. They get carried out, and they say, no, we're okay, we're fine, there's nothing wrong, we can do it, we're better than them, all that stuff. And they did not recognize that we have a culture that needs to be attended to. We have a culture that has been out of place for a while, for a few centuries, that we need to heal, we need to care for, we need to service. We need a culture that works, that solves problems, that is effective in solving those problems, that acknowledges problems and is able to solve those problems. But what is a culture? What exactly is a culture? Well, a culture can mean many components, but for the Muslim world, the culture is revolved around Islam, but it's not just Islam. The culture can have many layers or some extra layers besides Islam that creates it. It has the layer of our understanding of Islam, or how our operating system is. That's part of the culture. Also part of the culture is the intellectual product across the centuries, all those fiqh books and all those aqidah books and all those other kind of writings. That's all part of it. It's all trying to approximate Islam or describe Islam or give an explanation to Islam. But it's also a human effort. And part of the culture also, which is a very, very, very big part of the culture, is the experience. This is how it flows through time. It's not constant. It changes based on reality. And this is obvious in the fiqh books. So that culture has been out of place for a while, and it needs to be taken care of. It needs to be brought up to speed. And they have emphasized, very rightfully, the identity, which is the basic building blocks if you want to actually create a sound, stable, successful culture. But you also have to recognize your responsibilities toward that culture. Because at the end of the day, Islam is a guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that is not enough to create istikhlaf. Istikhlaf, or the delegation on this earth, which is the core concept for why a Muslim civilization should be. Why should it come to this earth? Istikhlaf. Because istikhlaf is partnership between the wahi, the revelation, and between humanity, us. And part of that partnership is that we have to fix problems. We have to fix our own problems. Also, some of the deviation of the conservative path is that they excessively relied on the people that have passed. Like, if a particular scholar from 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago is supposed to fix our problems, is it really their responsibility? Are they supposed to foresee the future for years and eons into the future and fix everybody's problem until the end of time? Do we not have any responsibility? Do we not have any obligation? Are we not supposed to do our part in this? Why are we supposed to assume that they're supermen? Because they're not. Everyone is living in their own time frame, and that time frame affects a lot of what they write about. And one particular individual who I would very, very briefly like to talk about, who is very, very abused and misunderstood between those two groups of people, and sort of idealized or exactly the opposite, depending on which group you belong to. A lot of this is on the TVs nowadays. Is the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah. Before you even read anything about Ibn Taymiyyah, before you even, imagine something you said 5 years ago, okay? Imagine you hearing something you said 5 years ago. And you said, you know what, that doesn't make sense. Is that really me? Did I say that? But then people remind you, but you were going through this and that, and your circumstances were this, and your circumstances were that. You say, oh, yeah. Well, if you actually read the bibliography, before you read the intellectual production of that particular scholar, if you read the bibliography, how much turmoil the political circumstance was, how much fragmentation, how much disasters, utter disasters of the Muslim world. Do you not think this is going to affect how people write and their understanding of this world? If I see a person like that, and I see if they dedicated their life to addressing the problems of their society, all I want to do is to hug him and tell him thank you. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for spending the rest of your entire life trying to do good. I may disagree with him, and that's okay. I may not take everything they say, and that's okay. I could disagree with my father, I still love him. I could disagree with my grandfather, I still love him and respect him. But you have to understand the context. People on one end, they make the devil out of him, and people on the other end, they make him as you cannot, almost like Quran. It's all part of this deviation. He did not even get married. He didn't have time to get married. He was taking care of people. He was taking care of their problems. One time, his mother wrote him a letter. Where are you? I haven't seen you in years. And he didn't go see her. He just wrote back, said, I'm really sorry. I'm really busy. Please accept my apologies. This is someone who should be praised. But this is not someone who should be followed blindly either, or anyone else for that matter. So, in the midst of this, I would like to define that particular conflict as the intellectual civil war that we're suffering from. And it's raging on, and it's not subsiding, unfortunately. We have to be very conscientious of this, because every time you hear someone talk, you have to realize you have to understand where they're coming from, what their background. And I'm not here to tell you should follow one particular path or the other. I'm here to tell you that this is the problem. The civil war is a problem. Anything that fragments society is a problem. Anything that puts wedges between people is a problem. So how do you bring them together? Well, that seems like a monumental task. That seems like almost impossible task. It could be, but if you actually show them that conflict is living in a particular sphere, a particular domain, called the argument domain, in a particular domain that is ideological, not in the religious sense, in the political sense, not in the domain of actual knowledge. What is the difference between the debate or the argument or the ideological domain and the domain of knowledge. There's a very, very, very distinct difference. One is people go from conclusion to evidence, and that's the ideological domain. And the other one, people go from evidence to conclusion. That's the domain of knowledge. So if you tell them that war that is raging on, it will never be resolved. It will never be resolved. It will never be resolved because it doesn't live in the right layer of a human interaction. And that does not mean that ideologies are bad or they're good. They're good to mobilize people, but they're plans, they're experiments, they're like party plans, like political parties and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're experiments. They're there to move people from situation A to situation B. They're not there to describe what situation A is. That you need actual research to do that. But they're there to move people from situation A to situation B, and that is necessary. People need that particular motivation. But to mix between that and actual reality, or to say that my understanding is the absolute truth. The group A says, my understanding is the absolute rationale. Well, they're just blindly following what they don't realize they're following. And group B is saying, my understanding is absolutely what Islam is, and any deviation from that is blasphemy. But is it really? Can we talk about the details? So, what do we need at the end of the day? Or, قُلْ قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ الْعَظِيمَ. الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. I know this topic is pretty long, and I've butchered it pretty much in a very, very short and concise version. Probably needs a lot of work more than this. But what do we need at the end of the day? We need to, number one, recognize very, very importantly the value of being متصالحين مع أنفسنا مع ذاتنا ومع تاريخنا ومع ثقافتنا. We have to be okay with what we are. We shouldn't beat ourselves. We shouldn't stab ourselves. We shouldn't devaluate ourselves. We should be very confident. We should be very strong and secure on the inside. And this is a very strong point for the conservative side. We should adopt that. We should learn from that. It's a very positive point. At the end of the day, we should recognize that our culture, with that definition that I said, that revolves around Islam but includes so much more than Islam, needs to be taken care of, needs to be brought up to speed, needs to be updated, needs to be addressed, needs to be nourished. We need to service it. We need to put some effort into it, into fixing real problems. They're not theoretical problems. They're real problems that we have to face that we don't have good solution for. Well, what kind of problems is it? I'm just going to cite them. Not that I have the greatest solution for them, but to just recognize that there are some serious problems. On the political front, the political systems have changed significantly. Now you have countries that are multicultural, multi-religious, multi whatever. Well, that is significantly different from the prior years. The geopolitical theory of the time was dividing the world into two places. And by the way, people thought that was part of faith. And it was, Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Islam. And surprisingly, it was Ibn Taymiyyah who put a crack into that theory and said, you know what? That's not working. There's a third category that we have addressed. Category of people where the rulers are, and the people are Muslims. And that category that he created, that wedge that he made the update to that political theory of the time, pretty much spans the entire Muslim world right now. So how do you address this issue? How do you address the issue of citizenship, muwatana? This is some serious problems when you look at it from historical perspective only. How do you address the issue of wala wal bara? Because if you follow everything that is told of you historically, you're going to have some problems. How do you follow the issue of representation? How do you address the issue of faqh al-taghallub, or justification of dictatorship? And on the economic end, there's so many other things. How do you address the issue of financing that actually makes people actually fair, not in the current form? How do you address the issue of interest? You see, people, Group A justifies interest. Group B, tries to make what I personally call fictitious solutions. But in reality is what the issue is and not that we have time to talk about interest, but interest is dissociated from society, and that's why it's so harmful. It's dissociated. The interest has to be connected to productivity. So it be connected to society rather than dissociated from society. It becomes like the plague that just ruins things. And so forth with insurance and all that. So there's a lot of problems, and putting an end to the civil war is one step to hopefully, inshallah, bring people back together and addressing this issue. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل بيننا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معاصيك ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا ومتعنا اللهم بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقوتنا ما أحييتنا واجعله الوارث منا واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا وانصرنا على من عادانا ولا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم وأقم الصلاة.